Yeah, I need you on the daily, daily. Couple weeks and I'd go crazy, crazy. Yeah, I need you on the regular, the regular. Yeah, I need you, yeah, I'm telling ya, I'm telling ya. Yeah, I need you on the daily, daily.
Hi, welcome to Devos with Debbie. So today, let's look at humility. This was a theme that kept up coming up in weird ways in my readings today. So one way is quite explicitly in Jesus' words in Luke 14. And it's interesting, he gives this scenario where there's this huge wedding feast. What's more formal and more important than a wedding feast, where you actually have seats of honor, where people who are closer to the bride and groom or family or friends or very significant roles in their lives have special seating. And so he sets up the scenario and he says, when you're invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in a place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him. And he who invited you both will come and say, give your place to this person. And then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at table with you. Verse 11, for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. And that's verses 7 through 11. And it's super interesting because this scenario highlights that humbling. You know, someone who thinks, oh, I'm all of that, I deserve this seat. It's just like one of those cringe-worthy, like awkward moments. But then someone who comes with a low, humble spirit, you know, thinking this is where I belong, gets honored as they're moved forward. And so keeping that in mind, I thought it'd be interesting to look at the story of Esther, which I just started. And I'll jump a little bit ahead in the story that I didn't read. But it's so interesting. First, you have two prominent characters that I want to talk about. One is we have Esther. And I have a feeling that Esther has a humble spirit. She is chosen because she's beautiful. We learn later on that she's also strategic and pretty wise and strong and brave. But again, that word strategic keeps coming to my head as I read this story. I just see how she is thinking very critically about her scenario and wondering, okay, God has placed me here. How can I leverage it for God's glory, for my good? Even though actually the book of Esther is one of the only, I think it's the only book in the Bible that doesn't actually talk about God directly. But she is a Jewish woman. So all that to say, she's chosen, but I do believe we see a deal of humility with her. Not an entitlement that she should be queen, but a humility. And then another character where we see humility is Mordecai, and where we don't see humility is Haman. So Mordecai doesn't really seem to come from greatness, but he discovers this plot to kill the king, and he prevents it. It's really cool through Esther, and it's recorded, and we're gonna see later. I don't know if I'll get to talk about this tomorrow, but later his name comes up again, and Haman, a right hand man of king. I have here in my scripture King Ahasuerus. For some reason, in the back of my head, I remembered Xerxes. So I don't know if there's two different names for this king, or I just never knew the king's actual name. But Haman thinks he's all that. And there's a point in the story where he thinks that the king wants to honor him, but really he wants to honor Mordecai. And so he pumps up, like, this is what you should do to honor this person. This is all the things you should do. And it ends up being his mortal, like someone who he absolutely despises and hates. But we see this pride of Haman when Mordecai decides not to bow down before him. And there's a lot of symbolism in bowing down to someone, paying respect. But also, the Jewish people were quite distinct in that they were explicit to worship only Yahweh. And we see in the book of Daniel, for example, when Daniel and also his three friends in particular refused to bow down and worship this idol and refused to bow down and worship this king. And they're punished for that because bowing down has deep symbolism of worship and respect and honor. And Mordecai does not bow down before Haman, and it just infuriates him. Haman comes with this entitlement that man should bow before me. And I don't really know what my point is here other than just to see that pride is the undoing of Haman. And humility is ultimately what leads Mordecai to be exalted. And humility is for Esther, in Esther's case, she saves her people through her boldness. But she never would have gotten there if she had a sense of entitlement. Entitlement's just not attractive, It's just really not. And so all that to say, there's a small verse in Psalm 147 that I was reading today that talks about humility as well. It says, the Lord lifts up the humble, and he casts the wicked to the ground. And again, verse 10 and 11, it says, his delight is not in the strength of the horse, nor his pleasure in the legs of a man, but the Lord takes pleasure in those who fear him, and those who hope in his steadfast love. As we position ourselves humbly before a God like our God, he honors and lifts up the humble. And frankly, he prefers it. He prefers those who fear him and who hope in him. This psalm also had some really pretty words of hope too. It says, verse 3, he heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Verse 4, he determines the number of the stars. He gives to all of them their names. Verse 5, great is our Lord and abundant in power. His understanding is beyond measure. And verse 6, finally again, the Lord lifts up the humble, and he casts the wicked to the ground. So we serve a God who honors the humble and puts down the pride. So let's learn a little bit about humility and ask God to teach us how to be humble. So that's it for today. Have a good day. Bye.